The turbulent English Channel and the unrelenting pounding of its waves continue to tell a story of an early morning on these Normandy beaches, a day unlike any other.
There's no day that doesn't go by that I don't think of these things. You know, the things that at least what I went through.
The remnants of war remain, still prevalent, even though the battle on this part of the French coast raged for only a short time, more than 6 decades ago.
Scariest thing that ever happened to me in my life.
The years have not erased the memories of those who were there, nor the images of death and destruction that haunt them still.
He must have been an officer, because he said there are two kinds of people in this speech: those that are dead and those that are going to be dead. I remember that.
This was a time when good fought to conquer evil on these now peaceful beaches.
We lost a lot of people out there. A lot of good people.
Allies joined together on land, air, and sea to eliminate a menace that had enslaved a continent for nearly 5 years.
I've always been proud of the uniform I wore, the boys that I've served with.
On June 6, 1944, the largest invasion force the world had ever seen gathered secretly off a 60-mile stretch of Normandy coast that lined Adolf Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Over 5,000 ships and 155,000 soldiers were poised to strike with a force never before seen in war. The United States Navy would help decide the outcome. Loveland, Colorado is 4,500 miles from the shores of Normandy, France, and its landscape is starkly different from the one viewed by American sailors and soldiers on June 6, 1944. But it's here, in the Rocky Mountains, near the continental divide of the United States, that the U.S. Navy's vital contributions on D-Day are finally being cast in bronze. The Naval Order of the United States commissioned celebrated sculptor Stephen Spears of Fairhope, Alabama, to design the very first U.S. Navy monument in Normandy. A $500,000 fundraising campaign was put in motion, and a site on the French coast chosen.
The greatest amphibious assault in history, to not have a tribute just doesn't make sense.
Incredibly, for more than 6 decades, the American Navy has been overlooked on the shores of Normandy. After learning of this oversight, the Naval Order set out to finally honor the U.S. sailors who fought and the 1,068 who died during the initial phase of the D-Day invasion.
In my opinion, it boils down basically to the fact that if you look back at World War II, the war in Europe was the Army's war, and the war in the Pacific was the Navy's war. And unfortunately, that emphasis, I think, detracted from really recognizing the Navy's role in Europe. Plus the fact that there were no great battles that you could point to, like Midway or Coral Sea or Philippine Sea or Okinawa or Iwo Jima.
I think that it's time, before everyone is gone who was there and participated, that we make sure that story's not forgotten.
The United States Navy's role in the invasion began to come together in England in 1944 as the Allies massed over 3 million soldiers, more than half of them American. 124,000 of those troops assembled on the English coast were under the flag of the U.S. Navy.
I thought it was my duty. There weren't too many young men left. In fact, they were taking married men, too. So I just thought it was my duty. I wanted to help, and that's why I went in.
Operation Overlord was the code name for the planned Allied landings in Normandy and the liberation of Europe. The amphibious assault and naval gunfire phase of the invasion was called Operation Neptune. The landings in France were initially planned for June 5th, but a storm in the English Channel postponed the assault 24 hours. Bob Siner was 20 years old and on U.S. landing craft tank 653 when D-Day was put on hold due to wind, rain, and high seas.
Very rough. And a lot of the guys I know in my crew were from the Midwest and so forth, and I'd spent a part of my life on boats and everything, so a little better for seasick, but very tough on the soldiers and very tough on our crew. So we came back, and you know, everybody's exhausted by that time and didn't know what was going to happen. Then they said, we're going to go back again tomorrow morning, early, at night rather. We go back, so we did.
The bad weather had German commanders convinced that a cross-channel invasion of France in early June was unlikely. At 4:15 a.m. on June 5th, after getting word of a temporary break in the forecast, Allied Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower gave the order for his air and sea assault force to go. D-Day would be June 6th. The vast naval armada that headed for France included over 50,000 American sailors. Many were aboard battleships, destroyers, and heavy cruisers. A majority were assigned to landing and beaching craft, commonly known as LSTs, LCIs, and Higgins boats, the ships responsible for delivering tanks, vehicles, and troops onto Normandy shore. Additional American ships in the huge Allied convoy included minesweepers, frigates, coastal ships, and PT boats.
In the back of our minds, we knew that the Germans sooner or later were going to get it. Actually, I felt sorry for the bastards, to tell the truth. They didn't have a chance. Believe me, the Germans did not have a chance.
Every detail of the U.S. Navy's contribution to Neptune Overlord was mapped out. Every sailor knew his role and what was expected of him and his ship. Every man also knew he was part of the largest air, sea, and land assault in history.
Certainly in the long run, military training is absolutely essential. But we also have to remember that these guys were not professionals. They were citizen soldiers who just went and did their duty. And as I said, probably with great individuality and initiative and toughness.
The Allied fleet arrived secretly off the coast of Normandy in the early morning hours of June 6, 1944. The vast majority of American ships took up positions off beaches codenamed Utah and Omaha. The British, Canadian, French, and other allies would handle landing sectors known as Sword, Juno, and Gold. American Navy personnel would also help deliver United States Army infantry onto French soil at H hour, 6:30 a.m.
The way I feel is anybody that said they weren't afraid is a lot of baloney. I mean, I was scared.
Just after 5:30 a.m., American naval guns opened fire off Utah Beach. The shelling on Omaha began roughly 20 minutes later. Off Omaha, the battleship Arkansas and Texas and 9 U.S. destroyers pounded German positions along the 8,000-yard stretch of beach. 6 miles west of Omaha at Point du Hoc, the Texas turned its guns on a German position thought to have long-range guns in place, capable of reaching both landing beaches and ships in the channel. After 35 minutes of shelling the beach, cliffs, and bluffs along Omaha, the smoke cleared.
Whatever was done was not enough to make any difference to the Germans in their efficiency and ability to prevent us from landing.
Rocco Aimondi was on the Arkansas off a key stretch of Omaha Beach.
Their guns weren't positioned in such a way that unless you got real close, you couldn't even see them. They had large guns hidden like inside the rocks and so forth.
John Mahoney Jr. was aboard the primary control ship 552, directing landing craft into Omaha.
We went and examined pillbox afterwards, and they said, this is probably where our big guns hit, and it'd be a little ship with some men off the... Our guns didn't do any damage unless they were direct hit.
Despite the massive shelling on Omaha Beach by U.S. destroyers and battleships, the majority of the German bunkers, pillboxes, and gun positions were still in business. American Navy coxswains soon found this out as they guided their Higgins boats into the assigned sectors of Omaha. Aboard were seasick troops of the 29th and 1st Infantry Divisions.
All of a sudden, bullets were hitting on the side of the ship and the water, and I looked into the well of the boat, and there was 35 soldiers in there, and I don't think there was an atheist in there because every one of us was making a sign of the cross as we were going in. As I hit the beach, Wally Lawton lowered the ramp, and the soldiers started pouring out, and I seen them dropping. I seen them getting shot. God, it was an awful sight. It's a sight I'll never forget. It's been in my mind since. And this is the first time I ever talked about it. I hope it's my last. An awful bloody sight.
The sea was rough that day. They wasn't expecting 6-foot waves, and that's what made landing here at Omaha Beach real rough.
For the first 2 infantry waves in, the casualty rate ran nearly 50%. Those who made it to the protection of the seawall or bottom of the bluffs along Omaha were targeted by German mortar rounds, 88s, and well-entrenched machine guns.
And there was a lot of boom and banging going on. And I think to myself that we were 18 years old and we didn't know what the heck we were doing or what was going on. And just thank God that today we're still here to talk about it.
The bodies of soldiers who were killed, even before their landing craft touched French soil, floated in on the fast-rising tide.
One of the toughest things for us was that when we would come across parts of bodies floating, and we would have to report them in, and they had special people that picked them up. That never goes away. It stays with you all the time. When flashbacks come back, I see arms, legs, bodies.
On LCT 653, Bob Siner had a clear view of Easy Red Sector on Omaha, savagely defended by the veteran German 352nd Division.
There was just a huge mass of ships, of landing craft and everything, and circling around. And because there was no immediate success on the beach, a lot of ships that should have been in, unloaded, and gone out were still there on the beach. So there was a mass of ships close to the beach. It would have been a field day if the artillery had gone out farther, but it was obvious that they were determined to confine their fire to the beach.
Mortimer Kaplan, later to head the United States Internal Revenue Service under President John F. Kennedy, was assigned as a Navy beachmaster on Omaha on D-Day.
You're sort of a master policeman. I mean, you're a traffic policeman. I mean, you have to keep that beach clear, open, and we're told just keep on moving. Don't stand still. You're supposed to be moving all the time.
Kaplan watched everything unfold from an LST offshore. He was scheduled to land 6 to 8 hours after the initial assault. But with all the carnage, most of the Navy beachmasters wouldn't get ashore until June 7th.
Some shells were coming in, and it was like a wax museum. The bodies were all over the beach, climbing across little fences, things of that sort. There were some in the water, bodies which had been cut in pieces.
After the initial Navy shelling ended, and just minutes before the Higgins boats headed into Omaha Beach with infantry, Ernie Corvasi and his Naval Combat Demolition Unit of 8 men headed for Easy Red on Omaha.
I just volunteered, that's all. Our job was to blow up these obstacles. They had what they call hedgehogs, and then they had these telephone poles with a ramp, and on top of the telephone pole was a mine. That was for when our tide came in, the boats would just slide up there and the mine would explode. And our job was to blow up 50-yard gaps so the infantry could land.
Off Easy Red, it was low tide. German shore obstacles were visible to the crew of the NCDU, boat number 13.
I carried a rifle and a web belt with a canteen and ammunition and a rifle. And I forgot how many pounds of explosives I had on my back. I believe they called it tetratol. And as I got to the ramp with the small boat that was in to land, just as I jumped into the water, there was this explosion. And while I was underwater, maybe a couple of seconds, someone pulled me out, and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find any of the crew that I was attached to. The number of the small boat we were on was 13. I found out later that they were all killed. I was the only one left. I managed to crawl up the beach. I looked back and I could see these tanks that were supposed to float. They just sank. They went right to the bottom. And as I was laying there, I couldn't find any Navy men. And you could tell the Navy men because on our helmets we had a blue stripe that went around the helmet. There were some Army men about 10, 15 feet from me laying down with a medic and an 88 They called them 88s. The shells hit them, and they were gone. And
the NCDUs at Omaha suffered the highest casualty rate on D-Day, over 50%, with 31 killed and 60 wounded. 400 miles away from his Normandy headquarters, a 14th century chateau in the village of La Roche-Guyon, on the morning of D-Day, was the German commander in charge of defending Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's command center by the banks of the River Seine, just outside of Paris, was quiet. His office empty on D-Day. His bunker adjoining the chateau unoccupied. Hitler's most famous general was home in Germany, visiting his wife on June 6th, her 50th birthday, and spending time with his 15-year-old son Manfred, who was already in the German army. He had also planned to meet with Hitler. Manfred Rommel watched his father's expression as he took a phone call on the morning of D-Day, telling him of a huge Allied navy off the coast of Normandy.
He was very surprised because he relied on the expert view of the German Kriegsmarine that nobody could land under such weather conditions. It was a very courageous decision of General Eisenhower and a very successful. My father was away from the theater and some others as well. He said, this is very painful that they are landing while I am not there. The British and Americans were more courageous than the Germans concerning the weather. But in the morning, around 8 o'clock, there was still no clear picture of the situation in my father's and Rundstedt's headquarters. They still were doubtful if this really had been the landing. But this changed in 1 hour, and my father began when he heard it, he began to call his driver and to prepare himself for departing to France.
Around the time Rommel hung up his phone, U.S. Coast Guardsman Vincent DeFalco was aboard Landing Craft Infantry, or LCI number 92, transporting Army Rangers into the Dog White sector of Omaha Beach.
I seen the destroyers going back and forth, lobbing shells in, and the battleships all lobbing shells in on the beach, but they didn't do much damage at all. That beach was so fortified, them pillboxes, cement was that thick on them. They would just flicker off them. I tell you the truth, I almost thought we wasn't even going to make it. That's how fortified they were, the Germans.
DeFalco's LCI hit a mine, killing all the Rangers below decks. The tall New Englander fell overboard, swam to Omaha, and spent 14 hours on the beach waiting for medical help.
In fact, when it happened, I called for my mother. I was in that water, and I called for my mother.
While DeFalco lay on the beach, German artillery, mortars, and 88s pulverized Omaha.
You hear them whistling over them before they explode, and they never missed. They never missed.
18 U.S. Coast Guardsmen died on D-Day. The pre-landing U.S. naval bombardment had done little damage at Omaha. German soldiers inside reinforced concrete bunkers and pillboxes had barely been rattled by naval shelling.
They had us pinned down. Actually, you couldn't move. If you stood up, you were gone.
On the 4.5-mile stretch of Omaha, American infantry were landing at low tide, with 400 yards of shallow water, open beach, and active German guns in front of them. Jim Sheridan was just 18 years old and a gunner on the SS Benjamin Hawkins.
Water was full of bodies in it, and I was only 18 years old, and I didn't have any emotions. I was doing my duty, what I was supposed to do, and my God, those guys were, an hour before that, they were alive like me, and
The first wave on Omaha Beach was floundering. The second wave was also pinned down. Omaha had become a traffic jam of wrecked tanks, blown up vehicles, and soldiers dead, alive, and wounded. Aboard the USS Frankfurt and other American destroyers off the beach, it was obvious what needed to be done just 1.5 hours into the fight.
Our job was to go in there and stay there until we silenced each of the German heavy artillery in there, the machine gun nests, the mortar nests, and the sharpshooters.
Targets of opportunity, I'd say.
All along Omaha, U.S. Navy destroyers started moving in toward the beach, pounding German gun positions from point-blank range with their 5-inch shells. The destroyer Frankfurt firing from just 800 yards offshore. At Point du Hoc, the destroyer USS Satterlee and 2 other ships fired shells from close range at Germans who were dropping grenades and gunfire on 225 Army Rangers of the 2nd Battalion who were climbing the cliff. All along Omaha, U.S. naval ships had become up-close artillery support for soldiers on the beach, taking the place of Army tanks that were already out of action.
The destroyers stayed there until there were no more firing from any source of the Germans, and that was about sunset. The German wall was broken forever.
The German cemetery at Lacombe, just a few miles from the landing beaches, is a reminder of the deadly work done by the U.S. Navy. An estimated 4,000 to 9,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing on D-Day. The decision by U.S. Navy destroyers and battleships to take matters into their own hands on Omaha had resulted in the collapse of the German coastal defense by the afternoon of D-Day. The up-close artillery support helped the U.S. infantry get across the beach, over the bluffs, and finally establish a foothold on Fortress Europe.
I remember looking down in both directions, and as far as I could see, there were men on the sand there, and they were either dead or they were lying still because they didn't want to be dead, and because there was nothing but death for them if they got up, because none of the offensive actions of the Germans were stopped with all the things we did until the destroyers came in and destroyed the big guns and then all the others that they had. And by the time sunset, there was not a single German gun firing.
By the end of the day on June 6th, 34,000 troops were ashore on Omaha Beach. 3,000 Americans had been killed, wounded, or were missing in the fight.
A monumental achievement.
In Loveland, Colorado, sculptor Stephen Spears oversees the final touches on the 12-foot-high monument recognizing the U.S. Navy's role on D-Day.
Once the metal is chased and once we have that feeling that was there in the clay, in the bronze, the patina process begins, and that's where the metal is heated with a torch and treated with a recipe of chemicals to etch the coloration that will be there on the monument for a great deal of time to come, and it will age beautifully along with its setting and be there much longer than we will. It's an enormous project, but it needs to be. The site itself, when you put something as the backdrop being the English Channel, it will shrink the size visually, so it has to have that scale to be able to go in that environment.
Utah Beach is the final destination for Spears Monument. The sweeping views of the English Channel are one reason it will go here. Another is the French donated this part of their coast back to America just for the Navy Memorial. At Utah on D-Day, Jim Gaff was an 18-year-old Navy coxswain on a Higgins boat, delivering 4th Infantry Division soldiers and supplies onto the 9-mile stretch at H-hour.
D-Day morning, we were about 15 miles out, and we were about 500 yards astern of the battleship Texas, and she was firing her big guns in the Point to Hawk. And every time she'd fire the guns, we would move sideways about 25 feet.
Gaff made 30 round trips between the beach and the ships offshore.
I don't ever remember being scared. You know, it was an experience that I knew would probably be the most important thing I did in my entire life, would be part of that invasion.
Just before H-hour, French residents at Utah Beach found themselves in the middle of a battle between German guns inland and American naval ships in the Channel. Janine Gazengal-Lott was 11 years old and living with her family behind Utah.
We had the feeling we were going to die. The next shell is going to hit us and we're going to die. We would have stayed in the house, but it was crumbling all around us, all the plaster, all the windows crumbling and smashing. We couldn't stay in the house anymore, so we decided to move outside to a trench that belonged to another family, and to be together there.
Frenchman Yves Osma was 14 on D-Day, living near Utah Beach.
Of course, the Germans were firing back, and the duel was starting up between them and the American ships. We were right in the crossfire and could hear everything.
Osma's future wife, Cecile, was living in this house just behind the beach.
We prayed all night. It was shocking. Everything was moving in the house. The earth was shaking from all the shelling. We were right in the middle of the battle. We could hear the bullets passing everywhere.
Unlike Omaha, resistance on Utah was light. Over 20 German coastal batteries were neutralized quickly by U.S. naval shelling. The fight on the western edge of the Allied invasion on D-Day turned out to be more behind the beach than on it. Many times, American warships, including the battleship Nevada, were directed by spotters to hit German tanks and gun positions inland, where 13,000 paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne were facing fierce resistance in the Normandy hedgerows. Henri Coppel was 11 years old on D-Day and remembers.
They were doing some firing to support the troops inland. One could imagine the battle going on behind Utah Beach and on the Cotentin Peninsula. The ships were aiming at different places because the paratroopers were asking for support.
By the end of the day on June 6th, the U.S. Navy had delivered over 21,000 troops, 1,700 vehicles, and almost 2,000 tons of supplies onto Utah Beach. American casualties numbered just 197, with one destroyer sunk by a mine, the USS Corey. Many of the caissons of the famed artificial Mulberry Harbors are still here in Normandy today. Over 60 years ago, they were towed to France with the help of U.S. Navy tugboats and assembled with an assist by Navy Seabees. The destroyed bunkers on top of Pointe du Hoc also remain, as do many of the German bunkers, gun batteries, and pillboxes along the coast. What has been missing is a defining tribute to the United States Navy's contributions and sacrifice on D-Day. The U.S. Army has monuments and memorials to paratroopers, engineers, and infantry. The Army Air Force is recognized in Normandy, as are the contributions of all the other allies. But somehow, among the over 100 memorials, monuments, and plaques, there are none to the United States Navy, their actions forgotten, the sacrifice of over 1,000 American sailors and Coast Guardsmen overlooked. Sculptor Stephen Spears works tirelessly to correct the oversight.
I started peeling back the layers and trying to understand what I could do to try and do justice to representing something of such magnitude. And I felt strongly that there was no one that should be left out. It's a mission that I've been given and I want to do justice to. It's a privilege to be a part of, and it's something that intensity and that emotion that I feel hopefully is drawn right in the sculpture itself for everyone else to feel.
The Navy men of D-Day are no longer the 18 and 19-year-old boys who fought a war here decades ago. Many are making their final trip back to these French shores to raise the American flag one last time in the Normandy Cemetery. Lowell Purdue was on a Higgins boat off Utah Beach at H hour.
It was an experience that I never thought I'd be able to do. I'm just lucky to be alive today, because my whole crew's passed away since then.
Naval Combat Demolition Unit man Ernie Corvasi has never returned to Normandy. The memories of D-Day are still too vivid. The names of two of his crew are among the grave markers in the Normandy American Cemetery. Another is nearby on the Wall of the Missing. His commander, Lieutenant Elvin Vetter, is not here. All Ernie knows is that he died in the explosion.
Lieutenant Vetter, he was like a father to me. Not a day goes by that I don't think about it.
On a beautiful September day in France, below Stephen Spears' finished monument at Utah Beach, a large crowd gathers. The newest memorial on Normandy shores has completed its journey here, fittingly on a large ship, one final landing for the United States Navy on the French coast.
It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to the dedication of the United States Navy Normandy D-Day Monument.
Veterans of D-Day are here on this day, as are American and foreign dignitaries. Hundreds of residents of Normandy, too. Some who witnessed D-Day, others who have heard the stories passed down.
We are here to thank and pay tribute to all the men of the United States Navy who gave or risked their lives for our freedom in the Battle of Normandy. We especially honor those who traveled around the globe to be in attendance today. These brave men sitting in the front row were right over that dune or walking on this very soil on the morning of June 6, 1944, and we are honored to have them here among us today.
D'honorer la mémoire de vos ancêtres.
The actions of the air and ground forces were recounted and explained, but until now, no monument had paid tribute to the sailors and more particularly to the U.S. Navy. Thank you, dear American friends, for taking the initiative in honoring the memory of your ancestors by erecting this monument dedicated to the American Navy on these dunes.
The brave men who fought and died here on D-Day taught us all a profound lesson by their examples of courage and sacrifice. The lesson is that freedom must be fought for and defended by every generation. As President Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with honor and deep respect that the Naval Order of the United States dedicates this Navy D-Day Normandy Monument. Please unveil the monument.
The new U.S. Navy monument sits atop a German bunker now, above a gun position that once fired on American ships offshore and American soldiers running across this beach. They ran to this very spot, covering 1,000 yards of open sand at low tide, desperately looking for cover. Stephen Spears drew on all of these images to help symbolize in carved granite and bronze figures the United States Navy's role on D-Day.
It's important to understand the location of where it's going. It's on the highest point of Utah Beach. The backdrop is the English Channel. The battlefield is there. It is going to be the first thing you see when you approach Utah Beach. At night, when the sculpture is lit on a clear day, I believe you'll be able to see it from point to hawk. It is the fact that the human aspect and the figures is there will separate it from the other monuments that are there and give it that feeling that hopefully will draw the people to the piece.
This monument finally stands in lasting tribute to those members of the United States Navy who fought and died in the greatest amphibious operation in history. You have given honor to their service and to their memory by your presence here today.
It's an honor to be here with you, sir. Thank you.
He helped
Thank you
us
so
build
much.
it.
I thank you very much for doing them a great honour in this beautiful,
It's my
beautiful
pleasure, ma'am.
sculpture.
It's an honor for me. It truly is an honor, and
I'm sure it is, but to be able to do something that wonderful and to stand as a tribute forever to these people, the world will never, ever be able to pay it back.
representing the command phase, the implementation, and the aftermath to me was how I could encapsulate the whole story. But I also wanted to do it with characters or images of people that would represent those particular time frames, so that I could try and pull everyone together and show the huge involvement from so many aspects of the Navy. The way that the base is designed is to gradually move up towards the three figures to direct the eye. It's five-sided and pentagonal shape to represent the five beachheads of the invasion. I don't want to leave anyone out. I don't want anyone to feel that they've been forgotten. That's what this tribute is about, is to make sure that they're not forgotten.
I thought it was almost a stroke of genius. When we first decided to do this, I thought to myself, what could you do that could possibly encompass an operation of that magnitude? I think that he came up with three figures that represented the planning, the command and control, the leadership, if you will, the sailor who represented the men who executed the necessary combat operations, and of course the Navy combat demolition units.
But you must be very proud, a very brave man. We're very privileged to meet you. We really do appreciate everything that you did and everything that you gave.
Is this your daughter? Hi, what's your name?
Eileen.
Eileen. And you're French? Yeah. You live here?
Yeah, French.
The French have not forgotten the sacrifices made by so many young Americans.
Of Normandy in memories.
Yeah, I bet, yeah. It's been quite an event here when you think about it. Omaha, Utah, gold, sword, Juno.
Yeah.
Thank God for young men that will do that, isn't it?
America's role on D-Day and in World War II is woven into the historic fabric of Normandy. 9,386 American heroes who gave their lives for liberty are buried here. At the American Cemetery in Colville, local French citizens gather. The stories are passed on from generation to generation. Young and old adopt the graves of U.S. servicemen and honor them with flowers.
Toutes ces tombes, toutes ces croix, toutes ces... Je pense à ces mamans.
When I am here at the cemetery, I think about all of their families, the mothers, the sisters, everyone. So I come here with flowers as a gesture to honor these men, and when I do, I feel the same as a mother or sister might feel being here.
Merci beaucoup, et vive la France et vive l'Amérique.
All the French people that I met thought that we were gifts from God that came and helped them. Very, very appreciative of what we had done. And I was just proud to be there.
The U.S. Navy Monument now looks out over the horizon of the English Channel, whispering a story that can be heard all along the American landing beaches, from Utah to Omaha. On this coast, many decades ago, a great armada arrived here and fought courageously for freedom. Over 1,000 American sailors died during the fight. Think not only upon their passing, remember the glory of their spirit.
Well, when you think about it, you know, an entrenched enemy in pillboxes, looking down on the beach with machine guns and cannon, and those soldiers crossed that beach. It took an awful lot of guts.
You couldn't do it without the Navy. I mean, the Army would have to have a Navy. So they were vital absolutely vital to the operation.
From every generation, they'll be able to look at that and sense and feel the story, whether they're going up and touching the sides of the monument pedestal and finding the ship that their family member was associated with. I want to tie the human factor into this monument, and I want people to realize the lives and the intensity and the involvement of every one of those people that were there that day.
The proudest moment in your life of being an American is in a spot like that. You know, I was very proud.
They were free-fighting men who saw things going badly and had the ability and the individuality and the initiative to take action. And that's admirable. It's tremendous.
It was awful, and these are things that I will never forget.
I'm just glad I could be part of it and come home safe.